Hello, my name is Jenna Walkman and I'm Vice President of Ball Brothers Foundation. I'm also a member of Exponent Philanthropy's membership committee. I'm delighted to introduce this selection of member spotlights. You're about to see 4 short videos that offer a lens into the variety of Exponent Philanthropy members' work. Speakers will talk about disaster recovery and resilience, the important role that civil legal aid can have in fighting poverty, and more. The member spotlight speakers will be in the chat to answer your questions, and I look forward to connecting with you later in the video after chat. Enjoy!
Hi, I'm Greg Smiley, founder and CEO of Adira Foundation, and I'm so pleased to be with you here today to speak on Exponent's topic, using global approaches on complex care, integrating response across 5 communities into one. So a little bit about me and Adira Foundation. So 8 years ago, when I was posted overseas with the Joint United Nations Program on HIV/AIDS, I was living in South Africa and I had a horrible cycling accident that ripped open my face and necessitated 12 reconstructive surgeries throughout my nose, forehead, lips, teeth, gums, you name it. So I get what it's like to be a complex patient or patient with a complex health problem. I'm always a complex patient. You know, I wanted to marry not only my personal lived experience, but with a career in global health, trying to apply the models that have succeeded well in infectious diseases, large-scale integrated health models on HIV, tuberculosis, and others, and just apply a lot of those lessons over to other worthy populations. In my own family, we're dealing with MS and dementia, perhaps in yours as well. Neurodegenerative diseases are growing at a fast rate, and it's becoming an urgent problem that's demanding an urgent comprehensive response. So with that, I'd like to show you how we've applied what we're looking to do a bit more broadly. Okay, so again, I wanted to introduce this slide, but talk about those 5 patient populations that we're speaking more specifically about. ALS, Alzheimer's and related dementias, Huntington's, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's. Now, these 5 are just a population that we're trying to prove the concept. We're not trying to pick winners and losers here. We're looking to see how we can do these global health approaches more broadly to others. So multilateral funding, you know, it's a fancy word meaning over many sides. Basically, you're trying to get a pool of donors to work on common goals. And it largely depends on what you're putting in the center of that patient population. Who is your core? If it is something small like Huntington's disease, which frankly really might impact when you're bringing in caregivers and family members and so forth, a couple 100,000 people in the United States, that might limit your donor pool. People fund what they know and feel and see in their world every day. And not that many people are quite familiar with Huntington's disease. But if you make that core center population, that combination of 5 patient populations, that now we're getting to 10 million people in the US alone living with them, much less caring for them, it's a more universal appeal. And those 5 patient populations, they share far more in common than not. They've got issues of mobility, of caregiving, of long-term care situations, of financing, emotional changes. There's a lot that they share in common and a lot that we as donors can relate to. So we're hoping that we can appeal to much more radiance if we can attract those transformational donors that are keen to fund better programs for 10 million people. We feel like that we can also still preserve that financing that helps people in the typical ways that they need it. So why don't we do this more often? Well, we talk about silos on public health in particular, but it's basically, we like to slice and dice the problem in multiple ways. And if you're someone needing care, you can't find multiple ways to get the help you need. Getting 17 services for 17 needs is just enough to rob you of all of the time, energy, money, confidence that you have and really desperately need. So how do we approach tackling that a bit? We say, you know, silos are in part there because they're easy to fund. You can count something that is perhaps a little bit smaller. So it might be one program for one population in one town, say free Uber rides for people with Parkinson's disease that live in LA to get to the doctor. That is something that is relatively easier to count, measure impact for than trying to do something for 10 million people. So how far should we pull back? How large should that patient population be? You know, it's tough to say. For us, it's all dependent a bit on the listening and learning. We need to listen to as many people as we can to get that sense of what they need and how big we should be. From where we're sitting, we're trying to look at that vantage point of this imaginary but vital diagonal line. For us, it's a bit of a vantage point, say on the ridge of a mountain, where one side of the mountain we can look down and see how to help individuals, and on the other side we can look to see how we can help systems. So with these 5 patient populations, we hope that we're, and I know this is laughable, small enough to help the lives of individuals, but also large enough to create perhaps more cross-cutting, more cost-efficient systems. This is in context with the typical forms of help. Some are vertical, some are horizontal. Those vertical programs are the programs that you likely know and may already fund. Again, it's those disease-specific programs that might be localized and easier to measure, count, and so forth. Horizontal programs also arise for systemic problems, and quite often we speak to them from a government perspective. So thinking Medicare Part D, for example, a great program that's helped a lot of people, but it's also unwieldy to the average person. I mean, just using the words donut hole hopefully convey that point. And what we're hoping to do is try to straddle that line. So we look to listen and learn as much as anything else. And we feel that if we can combine those patient populations into one larger shared community where they can discuss and identify those problems of common concern, we can look to raise money towards those common concerns to hopefully complement that existing good work. So let's take this as a practical matter. You could quite easily rattle off 10, 20, 30 needs that someone might face, particularly if they're dealing with a complex health condition like neurodegenerative disease. Trying to find 1 or 2 might be doable, but 10, 12, it's too much, right? So we've asked nonprofits and the patients that they serve to tell us what are those backbreaking issues that are so large people fund last, if at all. And we tried to apply this last year in practice. In 2020, we launched, and our first round of grants last April were for COVID-19. And we convened those donors, those 12 grantees from all across the country, to tell us what are those pervasive issues that need additional funding. They spoke to emotional burnout for caregivers. They talked to navigating systems better. And they talked about having nonprofits speak to each other a little bit better on issues such as conferences, advocacy, and so forth. So we programmed to those. We also programmed to other ideas that we felt needed some additional resources. So we had demonstration projects ourselves on caregiving resources, on stigma and discrimination and others. Hopefully this comprehensive approach is supplementing those current good efforts. Now, this multilateral financing approach, it's not fantasy land. It's worked before. We've seen great successes, again, for infectious diseases and other similar type urgent emerging needs. They work well when you really reinforce priorities of objectivity, accountability, transparency, and so forth, and where you really listen to the community to the point where the community is driving those senses of priorities. So as I wind down, I wanted to share those key takeaways once again, to say, look, if you can make that core population in the center a little bit larger, hopefully you can radiate out a little bit wider, and bringing in more transformational donors in so that you can complement and preserve those current dollars that are helping in those unique ways to typical patient populations. So I wanted to thank you for listening to us today. At Adira, we are just into our 3rd round of competitive grants, and we're looking to marry those lessons from round 1 and round 2, widen the circle to more patients, more caregivers, but also more donors. We're looking to grow, and we're hoping that you preserve some time for us to listen and learn from you as well. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Hello, everyone. My name is Betsy Brill, and I'm president of Strategic Philanthropy Limited and a sustaining partner of Exponent Philanthropy. As we're all struggling to do our part in mitigating and dismantling racial injustice, I'm so excited to introduce all of you to a funder that walks the talk, the Equation Campaign, that's prioritized equity and racial justice since the inception of their work. The Equation Campaign was founded by the next generation of Rockefeller family members, Rebecca Rockefeller and Peter Case, and they understand the urgency of now, putting their philanthropic capital to work immediately to interrupt the climate crisis. I truly believe that we can all learn from their transformative power-building grants to the most affected at this time when climate change is more dire than ever before. And we know that grassroots people of color-led organizations are the missing link. Their model is instructive and provides a rare opportunity to partner with a group of donor thought leaders who are change-making as we speak. Welcome, and you're in for a fabulous learning experience. Off to you, Katie Redford, Executive Director, to tell you more about the incredible work they're doing.
Hi. As Betsy said, the Equation Campaign centers racial justice in all of our climate philanthropy, not only because that's the right thing to do, but because that's how we believe we will win. The existential threats posed by both climate change and racial injustice are inextricably linked, and so are the solutions. The science has made crystal clear that we have less than 10 years to cut our emissions in half and begin the transition to renewable energy, which sounds hard, but the good news is we have the technology, the resources, and the time to do that in a safe and gradual manner. The bad news is that the fossil fuel industry, the biggest source of those emissions, is blocking the solutions we have and need every step of the way. Not only that, they're expanding their operations right when we need to be winding them down. And where are they doing that? The vast majority of their operations are in communities where Black, Indigenous, and people of color live. They call these areas sacrifice zones. Their water, their air, their health, and their sacred lands are being poisoned and destroyed. That's why we prioritize grant making in these communities. We listen to and work directly with these historically marginalized BIPOC groups to ensure that they are getting the resources they need. In addition, we have a network of activists, experts, organizers working at the state and national levels. And we find out where the dots are. We help connect those dots, and then we fund the connections between those dots. In our startup year, we've launched 2 intermediary funds, our Frontline Environmental Justice Fund and our Climate Legal Defense Fund. And through these, we've funded powerful coalitions and networks, including those opposing the Line 3 tar sands pipeline in Minnesota, the LNG and petrochemical build out in Texas and the Gulf, and the Keystone XL pipeline in Nebraska, and many others. We do what it takes to invest in the collective power of these movements, providing core support to our grantees, rapidly responding to emergency needs, and offering technical support, training, networks, and resources for legal advice and defense. Rebecca Rockefeller Lambert and Peter Gilcase founded this 10-year campaign in 2020 to fast-track their own philanthropy and to support the bold and necessary actions that the science makes clear we must take. We have a small and nimble team of 3 that allows us to meet the urgency of the climate crisis with the speed and resources that the science demands. And here's Annie, one of our team members, to tell you more.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie with the Equation Campaign. few weeks ago, we heard a term from one of our partners in the Gulf South about the value of working with the head, heart, and the hands. What that looks like in action is using the latest cutting-edge science and proven strategies to work towards our goal of stopping oil and gas extraction and building climate justice. It means that we're fueled by fierce love for our families, communities, our homes, and that's what drives this work and our grantees. It also means that we show up where we're needed and we get hands-on where grantees ask for it. We don't just sit behind our desks cutting checks. We operate under the tenets of trust-based philanthropy to make sure that our grantees spend as much time as possible doing their critical work at the front line and not doing grant reporting, fundraising, metrics building, all these things that we are able to do. Our carbon budget is all used up. If we burn all the fossil fuels that are already in the pipeline, we will blow past every single benchmark the UN's International Panel on Climate Change has set to avoid the worst effects of a climate crisis. We cannot spend a single cent nor a single second building or expanding fossil fuel infrastructure. Our lives depend on it. In other words, we've dug a pretty deep hole already, and we can't afford to dig that hole any deeper when it comes to fossil fuels. The problem is oil and gas corporations are going to continue to build and extract as long as they're able, and they've got the narrative, legal, financial, and political power on their side. That is, until the folks like our grantees start pushing back. The Equation campaign is out to change the scales of justice and how they're tilted towards oil and gas industry.
We launched in 2020 to raise funds and fast-track resources to organizations filling gaps in two critically under-resourced pieces of the climate equation. First, we fund supply-side campaigns to halt or delay the expansion of oil and gas infrastructure in the United States at the source, which will prevent future warming and hasten the transition to more just and sustainable future. Second, by investing in the power of frontline communities to protect their rights and their homelands from fossil fuel industry harms while strengthening their leadership in the growing movement for climate and racial justice. And Corinne will say a little bit more about how.
Hi, I'm Corinne. In our startup year, we moved 3.5 million directly to the heart of the conflict, the frontline communities and their partners who are fighting to stop the expansion of oil and gas in the United States. This number reflects a combination of our own funds, money given to us to re-grant through one of our intermediaries, co-funding, and directed funding. Already, we've surpassed our total giving of 2020 in just the first half of 2021, and we are well on our way to almost tripling our total grant making and leveraging for this year. We are so excited to be able to do more now, together with our funding partners, and about 3 million already raised this year from grants to our intermediaries from donors such as the MacArthur Foundation and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. We direct the vast majority of this funding to historically underfunded groups. For example, more than 7% of our grantees of 2021 have been BIPOC-led organizations. As I briefly mentioned before, we do have two main re-granting mechanisms where more funders can join in: the Frontline Environmental Justice Fund and the Climate Legal Defense Fund. These both allow us to quickly respond to the needs of our grantees. For example, funding the Hip Hop Caucus in order to follow the money that funds the racist siting of pipeline projects and the police violence toward Black communities that often follows, as well as providing emergency legal support to water protectors at the Line 3 tar sands pipeline in Minnesota, or the Mountain Valley fracked gas pipeline in West Virginia and Virginia.
For too long, climate funders have prioritized only the expertise of scientists, economists, lawyers sitting in cities far away from where the harms are occurring. But we believe that the people who are closest to the harms are also closest to the solutions, and we are investing in their power.
They've been successfully fighting to defend their rights and protect their homelands for years, demanding racial and environmental justice for their communities. Oil and gas companies know that the biggest obstacle to expansion is the resistance from these communities. It's time we invest in their power.
This comes down to science, speed, and strategy. We're out of time to keep kicking the ball down the road to the next generation. We have to act now to invest in the powers of those most impacted by the existential threat of climate change and environmental racism. They have been winning David and Goliath struggles for so long with hardly any funding. Imagine what they could do if we fund them like we want them to win. And believe me, we do want them to win. As the IPCC has said, none of us are safe from the threats of the climate crisis. We need to give our best shot at ensuring a just and livable future for everybody. Thank you.
I'm Rasan Hall, and I'm the moderator of this session on how partnering with civil legal aid organizations can leverage the mission of countless Lean Foundation. My background is as a lawyer, a minister, a social justice advocate, and I serve on the board of a philanthropic organization as well. I am a longtime supporter of civil legal aid. Civil legal aid helps society's most vulnerable populations access essential services, obtain basic justice, and live lives of dignity. It also works to change public policies that hurt the poor. A disproportionate percentage of civil legal aid recipients are also people of color. In this session, you will hear from lean funders that support civil legal aid and from experienced civil legal aid practitioners. I will introduce each panelist in turn. We're going to begin with a brief video segment from a legal aid program in Massachusetts that captures the essential work of civil legal aid.
When I first met Jenna, she was understandably very upset and confused about what had happened. She had just recently given birth to her third child, so she was particularly vulnerable.
Oh, she told me, Jenna, don't worry about anything else. I will help you with this because I don't think this is your fault.
The work that we do helps low-income individuals in our community access justice and navigate the legal system. So I'll represent them in cases with insurance problems, housing problems. I represent clients in their immigration cases as well as their family law needs.
I was so relieved. I was so relieved.
It just wasn't fair. And I knew that with the proper intervention, we might actually be able to help her and to get her the correct coverage and to help eliminate that medical debt.
Boom, everything was so solved. Everything was solved.
Lisa Owens is today the executive director of Boston's Himes Foundation, prior to which she was the executive director of City Life, Vida Urbana, a bilingual community organization whose mission is to fight for racial, social, and economic justice and to empower the working class through coalition building and advocacy.
Thanks so much, Rasan. So for 7 years, I led a community-based organization, City Life, that worked to preserve and expand access to affordable, safe housing. Greater Boston Legal Services was an essential partner in that work. At City Life, we used a method that we called the sword and the shield. The sword represents grassroots community organizing and the agency and power of people who were actively fighting housing displacement. And the shield represents the power of civil legal aid acting in partnership with grassroots organizing. The sword and the shield work together to fight for justice and build community stability and power. At City Life, we saw many hundreds of people come into our organization in fear of being put out on the street, sometimes in a matter of days. Our organizers worked side by side with the tireless advocates at GBLS to educate our tenants about their rights and stop displacement. Because of the strength of the sword and shield, over 90% of our housing cases were successfully resolved. Our families were able to save their homes, and the neighborhoods they lived in gained new housing justice leaders who were able to guide others to stop displacement. And now at the Himes Foundation, I'm supporting civil legal aid because I know its value in the struggle for justice. We fund organizations and networks building movements for racial and economic justice. And we know how critical civil legal aid is to our grassroots groups working in housing, climate, transportation, and childcare. I invite people to join me in supporting movement building and building community stability and power by funding civil legal aid.
I'm now going to introduce Claire Sola, Managing Director of the Bigglesworth Family Foundation and co-founder of the Legal Services Funders Network in the Bay Area.
Thanks, Rasan. Bigglesworth is a 10-year-old small family foundation based in the San Francisco Bay Area with a corpus of about $22 million, 2 full-time staff, and a focus on funding civil legal aid. In preparing for this presentation, I went back and reread a 2017 article Exponent Philanthropy published about the work of our foundation. I thought today it might be interesting to share what continues to hold true and what has changed. We continue to believe that legal service organizations, also known as LSOs, provide the best tool to reduce poverty. Many people continue to erroneously assume that the government or for-profit law firms fully fund legal services. And legal services continues to be disproportionately underfunded in comparison with other safety net organizations, notwithstanding the fact that their ROI outpaces them. As a result, our foundation not only continues to fund legal services, we've increased our commitment to this area. The article next focused on the work that we've done that goes beyond our own grant making. By 2017, the entity we helped found, the Legal Service Funders Network, had 60 local participants, as well as a dozen national peer organizations. Now, the LSFN has nearly doubled in size, and there are 6 cities throughout the United States that are working on replication. In addition, we created the Legal Service Public Interest Law Bar Fellowship. Over 90% of our participants still don't have a legal service portfolio. Rather, they fund legal services as part of a strategy to support their existing program areas, such as foster care, education completion, immigration, and place-based funding. The LSFN continues to mobilize funder communities in response to both man-made and natural disasters. Finally, the article ended with a discussion about the role of a small funder. Bigglesworth continues to be able to take risks and be nimble, funding pilots and gap filling when larger funders, both private and government, have limitations on their grants. We continue to provide the LSFN with in-kind and financial support, and we continue to be a leader in the sector. Currently, we're helping to work on plans in California to disperse hundreds of millions of dollars to assist with eviction defense work and strengthen LSOs. So please join us in funding the work of your local legal service organization to ensure access to justice and help reduce poverty. Thank you.
Finally, let's hear from Betty Torres, who is the Executive Director of the Texas Access to Justice Foundation and is nationally recognized for her innovative approaches to delivering civil legal aid.
The Texas Access to Justice Foundation has funded civil legal aid over many decades. We see the difference that civil legal aid makes to people's lives. We see how it impacts the most vulnerable and disenfranchised communities, often people of color. Legal aid helps with some of the most basic problems facing poor people, such as housing and food insecurity, by providing a lawyer to help a family which is being evicted or facing foreclosure. It helps obtain unpaid wages by an unscrupulous employer taking advantage of often newly arriving immigrants. Legal aid helps families suffering at the hands of an abusive spouse or partner. It helps families with special needs children obtain the appropriate accommodations or services they need. Legal aid can help transform lives. And legal aid is on the front line of disaster relief work. In Texas, we know only too well that natural disasters can destroy lives. A family impacted by a disaster needs support, whether with FEMA or accessing vital benefits. It connects these communities to essential services. Civil legal aid helps individual families, and it helps build stronger communities where everyone can thrive. Thank you.
Racial and social justice requires legal justice if the rights of disadvantaged people are to be secure. The nation's foundations can play a key role in making this imperative a reality.
I'm Deborah Jacobs. I'm the president and CEO of the Patterson Foundation, a longtime member of Exponent Philanthropy. Thrilled to be with you today, along with the president and CEO of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, Patty McElreevy. Today we're going to talk about disasters and disaster funding and the role that each of us should have in that. I want to spend just a second to talk about how the Patterson Foundation got into disasters. We are a very small staff foundation, but we know disasters happen, whether they're economic, man-made, or Mother Nature forced. And we were trying to figure out how to have the maximum impact, or as Exponent Philanthropy likes to say, outsized impact with our dollars. Fortunately, at the same time we were being funded, CDP, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, was being created. And we learned that they were the experts and they would help guide us. So we have been able to not only participate effectively in disaster recovery, rebuild, the whole process, but we've also been able to help CDP build its own capacity. So today, I'm going to switch, and Patty's the expert, so it's time for us to learn from her. Patty, we often say that everyone is a disaster funder, and people look at us and go, no, I don't really fund disasters, okay? So why do we think everyone's a disaster funder?
Well, that's a great question, Deborah. I think the bottom line is, and I think COVID has demonstrated this, disasters impact everyone. They're experiential equalizers. They challenge us to be the best that we can. And in the past, when we talked about everyone being a disaster philanthropist, it was because if you've ever given, when you've seen a crisis on TV, when you've heard about it, even a community need, you've helped in a disaster. You've been there. And with CDP, what we're trying to do is get people to think bigger than that, to think more strategic, to be less reactive and more proactive to how they can be involved in disasters. And I think that's where, this pandemic has demonstrated for us the ripple effects of a disaster impact communities so deeply and in so many ways that if you're looking at your programming, you will probably, if you're pulling on the thread of how did this impact the community, did this mitigate the challenges they face in this disaster, or did the way I changed my program help with their recovery to this disaster, then you're a disaster philanthropist because something you've done has helped that community in their recovery, or something you will do will aid that community in their recovery from this disaster. And that's why we really try and get people to recognize that it's not about a different type of programming. It's about understanding how disasters impact your community and how what you're doing to help your community weather that.
We're at an interesting time right now because we have a global pandemic, we have social justice issues, and we have climate changes, impacts coming all at the same time. Perfect storm. Oh, what a metaphor for disaster philanthropy.
Exactly.
But as you look as the experts in strategic impact, what are you thinking about how all these three things should play out in our thinking?
Right. Well, they're all interconnected. Climate change is definitely driving the scale and scope of disasters. But also, when you're looking at the response and the recovery, the social justice movement, the systemic inequalities, the vulnerabilities that have been created by societal norms, they play out in the disaster. They play out in how communities, how the disaster feels to them. Do they have a safety net? Do they have the ability to evacuate when the hurricane order goes in? The bottom line is you look at the person. If you're looking at the person, the interconnectivity is very clear. And so that's why it's when you're looking at your programs to really address what does this person need? Or what does this community need? What does this town need? And if you're listening to them, if you're being responsive to their needs, chances are you're touching on more of those things than you think you are.
One of the themes of Exponent Philanthropy is we strive for outsized impact, all right? As you think about someone who's a no-staffed or small-staff foundation, and our goal is to have outsized impact, help us think about how we could think about being more effective when it comes to disaster philanthropy.
Collaboration. No one organization, no one government, no one individual can resolve the challenges that face us as a world today, as a globe. It requires all of us to be intent on mission and looking for like-minded individuals to work alongside us and to fill each other's gaps and to build on each other's strengths.
Well, at the Patterson Foundation, we often have two questions that we ask. Who else cares and what's possible? And that's the who else does care in listening and learning. It undergirds the path forward. Since we are such fans of CDP, all right, I would like you to share just a few ways that you help funders do what they do.
We kind of say in-house, we know disasters so you don't have to. We actually would like everyone to kind of understand them better as well, because as I said, there's so many layers to how it affects a community. But we try and ensure that you don't have to figure out what the needs may be or how your mission might connect in a disaster or how it might alter in a disaster. And so we have resources available on our website that can show you what areas you're concerned about, what is your strategy, and how that connects with disasters, how that might change within a disaster for a community. We're also, more than happy to talk about what nonprofits we have vetted that we know are working in those areas that, put you in touch with those organizations who are helping on the ground or your potential collaborators. We also have funds where people can put the funding into, and we will then disperse it into those communities based on a very rigorous process of needs assessments and analyzing and looking for the correct partners.
When you talk about partnering and working with others, one of the things we have learned from you is the importance of cash. Okay, cash, in kind, what should we do? So could you just talk about the realities of how that plays out? And because of your international experience, I think it even comes more vibrant.
Right, so I think cash is best. I mean, this is a phrase, it's been used, people talk about it, cash is best. And it's not because cash is not only easier to move, which it is, but it allows a lot more of the agency for decision making on what programs you need to be made at the most localized level. And if you're really committed to helping communities at the most local level and giving them that voice for their future, the cash is the most flexible for them. And I think people can sometimes think, well, we're handing out money. That's not what cash is about. Cash is about the resources going into at that level and allowing those decisions to be made at that level. In kind is the individual empathy. It's the immediate charity people want. They want to collect canned goods, or they want to get that winter coat out of the closet and distribute it. And they're just really trying to help, and they want to help in any way they can. But they don't think about the glut. I mean, that's really what it causes. It's logistically difficult to get these items sometimes to locations. There are resources that have to be taken away from the response to inventory what's been given, to find who's going to distribute them. And at the same time, the most difficult thing is the community that you're helping might say, but this isn't what I need.
Oftentimes people in philanthropy appropriately want to hold themselves to a very high standard, okay? And it's I better be an expert before I do this. Is it okay that I'm not an expert?
Yeah, of course. No one can be an expert in everything. And I think the disasters they're an expertise as well. So you could hire it, but if you're a small organization, you can contract it or consult with someone who does that. You don't need to always have that expertise internally. And I don't need to tell the Exponent Philanthropy members this, because they are aware that they work in that model. So it's about finding trusted interlocutors and trusting them to do that which you want done.
Patty, you have shared so much with us today, and all it does is whet my appetite for more. So I hope that anyone who is associated with Exponent Philanthropy, or actually anyone who watches this video, if you have any questions, of course, I'm happy at the Patterson Foundation to talk about what we do, how we do it, and when we do it. But we've got the expertise of a nationally, internationally respected organization, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, and I do hope people will check out their website, get their newsletters, follow them on social media, because they are a wealth of information to help us make better decisions. Patty, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.